Hello and welcome to Resolutionary Leaders. I am your host, Helena Gotto, and today we have Pradeep Sangha, who is a true resolutionary leader. His background is in neuroscience and performance psychology. Welcome so much to the podcast.
Hey, Helena, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing all your pearls. I know there's so much that we spoke a little and it was like, whoa, we're going to have to dive deep into this. So I feel that I kind of want to hand it over to you to just run with it, and I'll jump in as I can. However, as you know, my specialty, the podcast, is about navigating conflict in the workplace and how best to prime your brain, your nervous system, to successfully do so. So any kind of insights, tips, latest breakthroughs would be a welcome.
Sure, yeah. So wherever you want to start, I'm ready to go.
Well, let's start by you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, so we get your version.
Sure, yeah. I'll make this relevant to I guess the listeners, because if we're talking about conflict resolution and whether that's at home or in the workplace, I think there's a lot to talk about here. So I grew up in a traditional immigrant family household. My parents had immigrated over from India over in the early 70s. And I would say my parents were great, but it's not like they didn't lack their own challenges. Obviously, coming to a new country, they barely spoke the language. They had a young family. And so they had all of these challenges, you can say, that a lot of people have as immigrants and just people in normal life. But I grew up in a traditional household where there were traditional gender roles, which actually worked out very well for my parents. But the one thing that was challenging was that my dad, because he gave everything to us as a family, he worked hard, he built a business, and he was also supporting family back home in India. His parents, for example, and his siblings, he had a lot of pressure, and he dealt with alcoholism. So that was a major, you can say, source of conflict between my parents. And I just grew up being the elder son. I was a son that kind of learned how to navigate and mediate a lot of the conflict myself when my dad was drinking. When my dad was sober, it was great. He was a completely different person. But when he drank and drank too much in particular, he just became someone else. And then my mom turned into somebody else, and then they had their internal conflicts. So at a young age, as a young boy, I learned how to really calm my parents down, how to navigate and have mediate conversations, and to the point where I was the only person in the household that can calm both my dad and my mom. And I learned the tricks, and because my dad was a big guy too, and he was so physically statured and a very strong man, if he drank too much and something, like, he had his own challenges, there was something inside of him that, there's a lot of pain and anger, but he would wake up in the middle of the night sometimes with night terrors, and it was just like a bomb went off in the house. So I would try to figure out when he was drinking before he actually drank. And so I kind of figured out his behaviors and patterns, and I could tell my mom, I'm like, he's going to drink tonight. She's like, no, he's not. I'm like, yeah, he is. Oh. And so I figured that out. So I, as a young boy, you can say, outside of academics, started to study psychology of my dad, his behavior, and then my mom. But then I also got into psychology in itself, because I became a personal trainer at 17. And I was very much about fitness, but I was very much about helping other people. That was always a part of me, and you can say who I am. And what I realized was that 80% of the people wouldn't do the things that I would ask them to do, and actually put together a workout plan or a meal plan or anything like that. And I was like, oh, this is kind of strange. They seem motivated. They sound motivated, but why are they not executing? Why aren't they following through? That's when I started to study performance psychology. And prior to that, I was studying neuroscience as a young kid. Literally, when I was 11 years old, I was just fascinated by the brain. They called it brain science at that time. But then you couple that with, the reason I'm sharing all of this is because it all came together. My grandfather also immigrated over from India, and he was a very spiritual man. So my great-grandfather was a spiritual teacher in India for 60 plus years, taught my grandfather, who then taught me, and taught me practices such as mindfulness and meditation. But my grandfather was a very interesting man. He was also in the military in India for 35 years. And so he was a very spiritual man, but also very disciplined from a character perspective and from a life perspective. So he taught me so much as a young boy. And then I also grew up on an orchard because that was the business that my parents had started. And I as young as I could remember, I grew up on an orchard. And some days I was out there without any human contact. I'd just be me and the trees and the animals and the grass and the sky. And that was an amazing upbringing because I learned through that and through my grandfather and through studies of science, I learned things like mindfulness, meditation, being fully present, breathing, all of these tactics that you can say are very, very important for dealing with conflict. Because we're talking about calming the nervous system. We're talking about being in a state of inner mastery and control. And so all of these things, fast forward, I built a company around the science of and psychology around high performance in the workplace, where we help professionals not only perform better, but also have a better quality of life. Because if you're performing, but you don't have well-being or strong relationships or contentment or fulfillment within it, it's really all gone to waste. So that's what we do day in and day out. We're working with business professionals, CEOs, executive teams, senior leaders, business owners, really helping them up their performance, but also their quality of life at the same time.
Amazing. And so when you say we, it's a team of you. Do you go in? Tell me a bit about the process.
Well, it really just depends. If we're working with an individual, I would say it's more personalized, where it's like, okay, let's figure out what this person is primarily challenged with. So it's a very simple strategy. We say, okay, what's working out well for this individual? What are they challenged with? And what do they want to achieve? So what is it that they want out of life? And once we get clarity on that, then we can identify, because we partnered with over 20 different universities and research institutions in Canada, the US. And I've been studying this area for the last 30 plus years, and we have a lot of data points. And so we've created a system where we can identify I'm not going to say easily, but methodically, where this person needs to focus their attention and where we can improve things. So it could be perhaps this person doesn't have complete clarity over what they do want in life. Maybe they don't have the confidence. Maybe they don't have the skill set. Maybe they don't have the right support network. Perhaps they're dealing with some inner trauma that we're not trained to deal with. And then we have professionals that we partner with that need to help them overcome certain things. And so we find systematically what's working, what's not, and then help them alleviate those challenges and really scale up their performance, their productivity, their level of fulfillment in life. So it's a very systematic approach.
And so what about when you're working with teams?
Teams, it's a little bit different. It's personalized and systematic, but we tend to have more of a methodology there, a standard methodology that we have applied and used within organizations, because we know typically where the conflict is or what the issues are within teams. It's just finding out what magnitude it's actually apparent in that type of a team. So some teams, it's because they don't have a strong goal, for example, or they don't have the skill set, and someone missing the skill set is causing conflict within the organization. Or perhaps, for example, one of the things we see a lot is when you have a larger team, it's easier, and if the team is not specifically measuring each person's performance in accordance to the team goals, it's easier for people to slack off. And when people slack off, then other people feel resentment, and there's a feeling of inequity, and that causes conflict, whether that's brought up implicitly or explicitly, explicit in terms of conversation, or implicitly within their own, within themselves. Sometimes people just don't like to complain, but they feel this resentment inside, and that just builds up over time. And maybe, someone might just quit as a result of that. So it's a little bit of a different approach.
Okay, so you said earlier when you were a trainer and you had people that would show up and they would be, they appeared to be motivated and appeared to want to go and do what you were telling them to do, but then they didn't. So now that you have all this knowledge and learning, what do you attribute that to?
I would say the vast majority of it back then, and I learned this, I would say fairly fast, is people's belief systems. And that's essentially it. If we can help shift people's belief systems out, there's a typical communication part and everything else. But even within communication, you can teach someone to be an effective communicator. But if their belief system about a person, so let's just say there's conflict within two individuals, And you can teach them how to communicate effectively within each other, but if they believe a certain thing about the other individual, it doesn't matter how well they communicate, because they're still going to believe that. What we have to do is shift people's belief systems in alignment with the team goals and the organizational goals, as well as the individual's goals. Because if the belief systems don't align, if we're trying to shift someone's belief system to align more with the organization or the team, but it feels out of alignment for the individual, it's not going to work. So it really comes down to people's belief systems and aligning their belief systems with a supportive environment, because that's the most important thing. Because if people have very differing beliefs, you're going to have conflict. And that conflict, the greater the difference in the beliefs, the greater the conflict.
So do you focus on how you create the environment for people to identify these conflicting belief systems and communicate around that?
Yeah, I would say our approach is very direct. So we have a very direct approach. We come in, and when we talk, we don't really beat around the bushes. We basically say, here are the basic belief systems, and let's see if you're aligned or not. It's not indirect. We don't, we're trying not to be we're going there with a soft approach, but we're being very direct. And that's our style, and it works well. So we go and we identify that. We say, hey, one of the major beliefs is, for example, do your personal goals align with your team goals, your personal goals at home? And if they don't, let's figure them out. Mm-hmm. Let's figure out. And then we get into the individual's personal goals, and then we uncover perhaps they don't align, and let's figure out why they don't align. Or if there's a major misalignment, can that person still move forward? Or perhaps the environment is not for them. So it's a very direct approach in terms of how we deal with those.
Now, just to change the subject, but I see a book behind you, The Complete Man. Did you write that book?
Yes. Yeah. I wrote that in 2020 because we have a very specific niche as well, where we do a lot of work with men's leadership. And in 2020, when COVID happened, what we saw was individuals struggling with their identity, predominantly men, because men tied their identities more towards their jobs and career success. And so I said, okay, this is I always wanted to write this book. I've written a number of books before, but this is the one that I wanted to write. And then so I literally just sat down for 9 months and I told my team, okay, this is all I'm going to do. And so I started writing in 2020, and by the end of November, we had the book out.
Wow. So what are you personally working on right now?
Oh, with myself?
Well, no, not just with yourself, but what are you excited about?
Wow, yeah, there's so many things. I would say our main focus is really helping professionals in all areas of their life. So I'm excited about the work that we do, because there's very few organizations that do it based on our level of background and expertise. We have a very scientific background. And so I'm excited about the work that we're doing there, coming into organizations and helping them improve their performance. And it's not the typical approach when individuals say, hey, well, like my home life has changed completely, or I have more time for my kids and my spouse, or whatever that looks like. That's what I'm excited about. That's what drives me. There's a number of other things as well. As a dad, I'm excited because I get to learn how to be a better dad every day. So it's one of the biggest challenges I have in life, but it's also one of the biggest growth opportunities for me, because I can tell you, the better I get at being a dad, the better I get in my profession as well.
100%. Holding the calm, being in a space where when you have children, they're in a lot of conflict as little human beings trying to work out the world and what they want to do, and like just in that moment what they want to do. Do they want to complain about this? Do they want to get upset that they're having cornflakes and not a pancake? And just trying to just hold the calm in that environment is it's a test. It's a real test.
Absolutely, because it's not just their world. They're trying to make the parents' world a little bit more volatile as well. So that's the test, right? They test their environment, but they also test parents.
So I don't know if this would take too long, but do you have a case study that you could walk us through a little bit about how your process is applied to a situation?
Sure. Yeah. We have lots of case studies. So one of the things, one particular example, one individual who was an executive, she really was struggling in terms of had so much on her plate from a work perspective and had the opportunity to excel and actually was in line for a promotion, but she was completely unsure whether she should take it or not, or how she was going to take it because she was already overwhelmed. So then what we did is we took a look and we said, okay, so first of all, do you have clarity about what you want in life?
Mm-hmm.
And so we went through a process where we actually identified what she wanted in life, because for her in particular, and this is what happens when we get older, is that we take on more of a role perspective than being in true alignment with who we are. So we take on roles as our profession, we take on roles as a spouse, as a parent, as a, you know, we probably have parents, elderly parents that we need to take care of. So all of these roles are now who we've become, and then we kind of forget about who we are inside, what we call the true self. And that's where misalignment happens. If we're not in alignment with the true self, then it doesn't matter what you do, you still feel like something's missing.
Mm.
So we had to take her through an exercise. Many of the people that we work with, we get them to go away for a couple of days. I do this myself. Every year I go away for 3 or 4 days, uninterrupted, no family members, no spouse, just me, in a fairly content place. And I just do a lot of inner reflection and go through the exercises, which is, who am I at the core and what do I want outside of my roles as a dad, as a husband, as a business leader? What do I want? And I have to reestablish that every year. So this is one of the things that we did with her.
Mm-hmm.
Redefined her identity, because that's very important. And then we were able to structure in some goals, because then goals can be aligned. There's no point in having goals if it's not aligned with the true self. And then we identified, okay, what's not in alignment with her goals? And one of the things was she was just working so much in terms of length of hours. So then we identified, can she shorten that? And a lot of it had to do with things like, her performance optimization. So most people, Elena, are operating anywhere between 30 to 70% of their potential. A lot of people think that working hard is being productive. That's not the case.
Mm.
Vast majority of people, we can double their productivity and triple their productivity and performance. And that's kind of I can pretty much guarantee that, because most people haven't learned the principles of performance. So with her, we taught her the principles of performance. For example, how do you actually structure your days appropriately? How do you plan effectively?
How do you structure your day? How do you structure your day effectively?
Well,
chunks?
It depends on the person. It's chunking is one, and then your most important resource or your outcomes need to be scheduled in priority, for example, but also when you have the highest energy throughout the day and your highest level of focus, because that's another element.
Mm-hmm.
And then we cut out things like working extra hours, because those extra hours are actually taking away focus. They're actually taking away recovery time. And then we had to train her staff, her support staff and her team, because the time that she was taking off was being utilized by others. People would book appointments in those times. And so we had to put in a strict discipline for her in terms of her approach, but also how her team was kind of, stepping on outside of the boundaries there. And so we had to set clear boundaries with them. So, and then there's a number of different other factors that we had. So a big part of our work is health performance coaching too. So what kind of nutrients should be taking, your sleep patterns, all these other elements that are involved in our work. We don't put together personal like fitness programs or meal plans, but we talk about everything else: nutrition, supplements, sleep, focus, all these other things. And so we were able to help her increase her energy levels. So with a systematic approach, then now, before she felt like she literally was, every time she looked in the mirror, she felt like she was getting older and older. And she felt like she was letting her kids down as a mom, letting her husband down as a wife. And after a period of time, between 6 to 12 months, she felt like she was looking younger. She had way more energy. She felt more engaged and enthusiastic about being a mom and being a wife. And she was able to also set boundaries at work. So we had a very systematic approach, but ultimately the end result was she was just way happier.
Mm.
She performed better. She was way happier. She was more engaged and present with her kids. And she had a lot more clarity in life in terms of where she was going. Because when we don't have clarity, everything again, we can be going 100 miles an hour, but it feels like we're just perhaps not going in the right direction. So that's a particular case study.
So I had met him on Instagram, and they're, I keep getting these things about, you just need to take this one pill. This one pill will fix you. So you've got this insight into nutrition. What's your take on, obviously but when you talk about supplementing, people like, you
Hmm.
need NAD or NAN or whatever it is, LP this.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that for the...
Well, I can tell you. So that's not, obviously I have a background in this area, but that's not my main focus. My main focus is on the cognitive and emotional side, and on the spiritual side. I have people on my team that focus on in this area which is health performance coaching. So my rule of thumb is that if you do other things in life, eat healthy, like proper vegetables and nutrients and protein, get enough sleep, you do exercise, and you minimize your stress, you're pretty much 90% of the way there. And so supplementation is great. But if you're not doing those basics, then supplements aren't going to really do much for you. And so there are supplements, like I do take NAD, I take quercetin, I take magnesium, zinc, the basics, you can say, multivitamin, multiminerals. I don't go overboard in terms of the supplements, but there's basic ones that we need. For example, magnesium and zinc are basic ones. Vitamin D is another basic one that we need. We need a multivitamin, multimineral, vitamin C. So those are the basics. You don't have to go crazy. Now, there's a lot of nootropics out there that are claiming that certain pills are helping with brain function and do certain things. For example, ginkgo is one that's been shown to improve brain function, so that's something I take as well. But the vast majority of them, the nutrients and supplement space, it's $1 billion industry. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm interested because everybody's looking for a hack without realizing that true performance is not a hack. You're not going to hack your way there. And that's part of the enjoyment of life too. You got to put in a little bit of work, because that's how we look back and we say, I did it. Not by taking pills and saying, oh yeah, I feel great. It's someone feels 10 times better after a tough workout than if they just did kind of like a hack. And there's machines now, like AI driven machines, that you can go in for 10 minutes and do a certain workout, and this says, just as good as an hour. But how good do you feel coming out of there mentally? So there's not only the cognitive aspect. The thing with health and performance, whether it's cognitive or physical, I think we overlook something. It's our central nervous system that is one of the key aspects that we are training. And sometimes that requires a little bit of tough work. Sometimes that requires an extended period of time. So that's my take on it. I'm not a huge fan of hacks, but I do think they do have some merit. But the longitudinal studies of them, we haven't followed people for 30, 40 years when it comes to these hacks to see what the true impact is.
So on that note, if you were to give the top 3 ways to calm the amygdala, and not hacks, but like daily practices, I think this fear center of the brain has been overstimulated for the majority of the world, and I think that finding ways to kind of still that, and especially in conflict, because it's very flared up, but just to just drop the baseline.
Yep. So
level.
yeah, I can give you 4 things.
Okay,
There's a number of them, right? So a lot of these have to do with longevity as well. One is definitely breathing. So breathing techniques, that's a basic one. That is something that we all need to learn, because there are different techniques. There are different techniques for breathing that lead to different results. So you can heighten your sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of, get you aroused, or you can slow it down into a parasympathetic nervous response, which means kind of slowing things down. So excitement versus slowing. So that's one aspect. The other one is walks. So daily walks are very, very important. Actually, there's a number of studies that have been shown in terms of what it actually does for people's state of mind. So this is something that I would recommend for everybody. Third one is exercise. I'm a huge advocate of exercise, not necessarily from the muscle perspective, but from the cognitive perspective, for the nervous system perspective, because it increases blood flow to the brain. You get taking in more oxygen, which is required, because typically when we're in a state of conflict, what ends up happening? For the vast majority of people, blood pressure goes up. right? There's a level of constriction. What we're looking to do is alleviate, and there's a tightening of energy. There's basically energy is being bound up, and through exercise we can actually release that energy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way of doing it, and those are just daily practices.
And when you say exercise, you're talking about high heart rate, deep breathing.
It doesn't.
Kind of,
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be that intense. We're just talking.
why is a walk not exercise? Like I was like, I'm walking every day. I've got it.
Yeah, it is considered exercise, but it's more of a calming exercise.
Right.
And so when I talk about exercise, I'm talking about more. So walks are what we call a recovery practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a recovery practice, whereas exercise is not necessarily a recovery practice.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually putting your body under stress. So you don't have to be, have a, 90% of your max heart rate or anything like that. But you want to be exerting effort. You want to feel like you're actually doing something that's above normal exertion.
What about a sauna? Could a sauna count as that?
Yeah, that's a good relax. It's a recovery exercise, so that's another one. So sauna, red light therapy, those have been shown to be good recovery exercises. Then there's activities such as Tai Chi and Qigong, ancient practices, or a relaxing type of yoga have also been shown to help calm the nervous system, for example. And then there's just a basic simple one, which is based on human social relationships, which are hanging around with people that you enjoy or make you laugh, and hugs.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way to calm the nervous system.
Mm.
And social relationships, strong relationships, trusting relationships, safe relationships have been tied to longevity.
Mm.
So people that feel like they have good relationships typically live longer.
They feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. And if we take a look at it, safety is the absence of stress.
Right.
That's essentially what it is.
The absence of fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And fear is a form of stress. So anxiety, unease, fear, panic, terror, those are all spectrums of fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And so when we can remove that, that's when we feel safe.
It's interesting. I hug my children a lot. I particularly, my eldest is more inclined to dysregulate, and I hug him all the time. Like it's something. It's like this, and it's this innate thing that I'm constantly feeling. I guess it's like I'm regulating him.
Yeah. I've dealt with my son as well, and he's not. You can tell because when he's in a state where he is not in tune with his emotions or he's having a level of anxiety, he doesn't want to be hugged. Like he's just kind of like, it's this response. So I have to be very careful in terms of how I approach that, because his automatic response sometimes is move away.
That's my middle son.
Yeah.
Middle son. And it's interesting that, thank you for reminding me about that. I will continue to keep hugging them as long as they'll let me.
Yeah.
Well, that was really helpful and informative. Thank you. I'm really interested in the breathing techniques, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, the difference. Where can I go to get more information on that? Obviously.
Oh, wow. You know what? You can just throw that into YouTube.
Okay.
Sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system and breathing. Because there's so much information out there. I think this is the beauty and sometimes the challenge. I was thinking about that today.
That's kind of it. Like there are so many different breathing techniques that I've seen. It's like, so can you just give me two? One for the parasympathetic, one for the sympathetic. Must I dive down into the internet again?
Yeah, the simplest one is 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. So, and it's been shown that even 5 of those breaths, so we're talking about less than a minute, can regulate your nervous system. So within a minute, we can regulate. And it's interesting. I'm going to share an example. We were working with a team of mediators, and they go into high conflict business situations and they mediate, like they are mediators. And one of the gentlemen, I remember him saying, he's like, I literally want to come out of these meetings and I want to shoot myself. That's how we felt, because it was just so tense and so much conflict. I said, okay, try this breathing technique. And it was very simple. It was just 4 seconds in. And then so there's different ways of doing this. 4 seconds in, and even a pause for a second or two once you breathe in. and then 5 to 6 seconds out, and then even a pause at the end. So it's not just about breathing slowly in and out, but also pauses in between. That gives space. And grounded too. The other one is putting your both feet on the ground and grounding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, do this whenever you feel tense in your next negotiation. And it was really interesting because he came out of the next one. He said, I've never felt better. He's like, this is amazing. I didn't realize. He's like, why didn't someone teach me this 30 years ago? And so just simple breathing is amazing. And we've never really been taught that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only thing that you die immediately without after a few minutes. Right?
Yes.
So speaking of mediators, I just spoke to this incredible woman, and that's where the saying "holding the calm" comes from.
Okay.
The Secret of Resolving Conflict and Diffusing Tension, Hesha Abrams. This is an amazing, amazing book. She's got really good techniques on managing, like how to hold the calm in conflict. So just for your personal interest.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that, it's such a great skill too, because what we're seeing right now, especially with the younger generation, is more and more of the younger generation getting into the workforce. That resilience piece and that calm piece isn't there as much because this generation is growing up on technology and it is changing their brains. Mm-hmm. And there's direct studies now that show that technology, social media, and usage of smartphones is impacting children's brains where they have a higher level of anxiety, particularly social anxiety.
Well, it makes complete sense when we're saying about the increase in fear. If you're on a screen, you're constantly seeing like shocking things. I mean, it's nonstop, but maybe it's a nice thing about a goat, but then suddenly it's like this terrible thing just happened and then that thing just happened. And now I'm playing a video game and I'm about to die for the next 10 minutes.
Yep, exactly. So we're seeing this in the workplace. And it does impact productivity. It does impact performance. And I think those individuals that learn how to bring in the peace and the calm, they're going to have not only a competitive advantage, they're going to be sought out because teams need that. They need this calmness and this content within the work environment, but also the home environment. This isn't just impacting work; it's impacting families even more.
Well, thank you so much for your time.